I think that we've learned so much as we've started parenting our
Mhm.
aging parents. Even before this group started, we learned so much, and some people have turned this into an art form.
Well, it's everybody has a story,
Yeah.
and some people can tell those stories really, really well. And one of those is Jim Comer. He is a speaker and an author, teaches people how to speak, but also has written a book about his experiences as a caregiver, because it was a role that you didn't necessarily anticipate yourself being in.
I did not apply for this job, to put it mildly. It came, it came when I was sound asleep. I was living out in California, working for a big HMO, writing speeches for a guy. I'm sound asleep at 7 a.m. Phone rings. I'm half awake. I kind of reach for it, and it's my parents' next door neighbor in Dallas. She has never called me in 34 years.
That's not going to be a good call.
I knew. It was right away. I knew this is not going to be good. And what she immediately said, Jim, your daddy is walking around in circles in the front yard in a daze, and I think he's having a stroke.
Oh, no.
And she was right.
Wow.
I mean, I called home. I tried to get him on the phone, and he wouldn't come. He was yelling in the background, but he wouldn't come for the phone. And I knew that her sidewalk diagnosis was right. And so in hours, I was on a plane to Dallas, where they've been living for 34 years. And by the time I got there, you'll love this, the neighbors had gotten my father to the hospital by telling him he was going for Mexican food. That's how they got him in the car.
Wow.
And by the time I got there, right. I mean,
so thankfully they got him to the hospital.
The neighbors got him to the hospital, but something happened at the hospital. I think the stroke really happened at the hospital, because by the time I got there, he couldn't walk, he couldn't talk, had no control of his bodily functions. And mother, with her dementia, didn't really understand what was happening. And I walk into that scene, and it was not easy.
And not only did their life change forever, in many ways, so did yours.
My life changed absolutely forever in that moment. The moment that I realized he'd had the stroke. And when I got there, the doctors told me he can stay here in this intensive care for 1 week, and then you have got to get him in a rehab. And of course, I realized the rehab couldn't be in Dallas because we had no family there, no relatives. They were all in the Austin area. So that very first week, a couple of days later, I flew down to Austin, have some cousins here, and they took me around. We went to 4 rehab centers in one afternoon, and they all looked the same to me. I'd never been in one, really.
Right, right, because why would you? Right.
One after the other. And finally, I chose St. David's because a nurse smiled at me. I mean, really? Yeah. I got this great smile from a nurse. I said, that's it, because that's how I hoped they would treat my dad. And they said that they'd bring him back in a they would send a car for him, and they'd bring him back that next Monday. And so I thought, great, they're going to send an ambulance for my dad. Terrific. Then, of course, I have to fly back home, and there's my mother. And she, of course, she said, I can still hear her saying it. She said, it's okay if daddy goes down to Austin. That's okay for him, but I am not leaving my house. And I'm going, oh, Mom, to myself, I'm going, Mom, you have to leave your house, because she couldn't be alone. He'd taken over everything. So my job was then to find a way to get her in the car to go down to Georgetown, right here outside of Austin, where my cousins had agreed to keep her until I could figure out what to do. But I had to get her in the car. And so I came up with this idea that I call it therapeutic lying. So the day that they were taking Dad down in the ambulance, I wanted to take Mother down the same day. And I bet everything on this big lie. It's 8:30 in the morning. I packed for her the night before. I go to her, breakfast table. There she is, the Dallas Morning News. And I say, Mom, how would you like to go get some ice cream? Well, my mama loves ice cream. Even at 8:30 in the morning, she put down the paper. She got up from the chair, real smile, and walked with me out of the house to her car, got into the car, and we drove away from her house of 34 years, and she never saw it again.
Wow.
That's tough.
Wow.
That's tough.
And I knew she would never see it again.
Right. But you
And
knew she
I want
couldn't
you to
stay
know
there.
what?
You knew she couldn't stay there.
Oh no,
Right.
she absolutely couldn't stay there. She did not know what she didn't know what was going on. Daddy had taken over everything
Mhm.
in the previous 5 years as
Mhm.
her dementia got worse and worse.
Mhm.
She couldn't possibly have been by herself.
Mhm.
But I want you to know, I did stop at the first Dairy Queen.
You did get her ice cream.
She did
I
get
got
ice cream.
And you took her to Austin, but yes.
Big gooey chocolate sundae.
Yeah.
Made her happy. And then we headed for I-35. And I'm heading down to Austin and I keep waiting, you know.
Yeah.
When is she going to ask where we're going? And she never did.
Interesting.
I kept waiting.
Yeah.
And she
Interesting.
started talking about the colors of passing cars, which I was happy for her to do that. But I kept waiting. We made it past Waco. We got all the way to Georgetown, got out, kissed her goodbye, and I headed to the airport because I'd been gone 11 days.
Wow.
I had a full-time job and I'd already used my vacation at Christmas. This was February. Actually 26 years ago this week.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness.
Wow.
Wow.
Something.
Wow.
Yeah, I just noticed that when I looked down there a minute ago, I was looking at my screen. It was like February. Oh my God, it's this week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that, that was the first part. And then I tried for, I say 6 months. I tried to go back and forth from LA to Austin every other weekend. And things kept coming up. They threw my father out of the rehab.
Oh.
Yeah, he was expelled from rehab because he used bad language to some nurses.
Oh no.
Oh.
Oh yeah, not kidding. What do you do when the head of the rehab calls you and says, "Sorry, your father can't stay here."
Right. You need to find him a new place. And you live
find him a new place
away.
Yeah.
The next weekend I had to be there, and I had 3 days. And by this time, Mother was driving my cousins crazy. So they were not saying that, but I knew she was. I needed to find assisted living for her and skilled nursing for him. And I was the luckiest guy in the world. I found him in the same place on the very first day I was here.
Wow.
Because that's
So
super overwhelming.
Oh yeah, and all that travel had to be wearing you out as the caregiver.
And thank goodness my father had a large bank account because I didn't. He was paying for the traveling because my credit card wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah.
After 6 months, I realized either I had to bring him to California, where everything was much more expensive, and they had no support system other than me, or else I had to quit my job and leave my friends and my house and my church and move to Texas, where I hadn't been in ever except in college. But I chose to come back, and it was the right choice.
That's a tough decision. A tough decision.
I spent 6 months trying not to do it. But it just, so many things kept coming up, and I didn't know if she's going to have another stroke. I didn't know how fast her dementia would move. There was just too many unknowables, and I just felt I needed to be there because I didn't want it to fall on my cousins. They'd done it. They'd been helping a lot, but they had their own kids and parents and jobs, and so I finally get back to Texas in October. And my father had a 100% comeback over that time. By the August, he was walking and talking and telling me how to drive the way he always did.
Right. You knew he was feeling better.
Back. He couldn't drive himself, but he was back. And so he got him into independent living. And fortunately, he was able to persuade them to take Mother. She really didn't belong in independent living. But he was a salesman. My father had been. So he used his sales ability to get them to agree to let her in on a trial run, which lasted for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we were real lucky. So I get here in October, my U-Haul, I've sold most of my stuff. And boy, all of a sudden, I was dealing with, dementia on a daily basis, which is very different than flying in night and day.
Yes.
And I mean, it was... because people can fake it for a few days. And my parents are pretty good at that over the years, especially at Christmas. But when you're there day to day, you really see it. And I can still remember my mother had she must have had 60 dresses in her closet. She would only wear 5 of them.
Yeah.
And I said, Mama, this is yours. I gave you this dress. No, you didn't. Do you want me to wear stolen clothes? These were stolen. And I mean, she said, Jim, they're going to put me in the Who Scout. People outside of Texas don't realize that is jail.
Right.
She believed she was going to jail if she wore any except the 5 dresses that she thought were hers.
So how did you, now that you were doing this on a daily basis, what kind of things did you do or learn to help you cope with it?
Well, the biggest lesson came about 3 or 4 weeks after I moved here. Mother, I was over there at the independent living, and she said she wanted to go see her sister Estelle, which would have been a perfectly logical request, except for one tiny fact. Estelle had been dead for 8 years. And I made the rookie caregiver mistake of telling her that. I said, Mama, we can't go to see Estelle. She's in heaven. And my mother looked at me, and it was as if that was brand new news. She'd never heard it before. And she started crying. I mean, sobbing, her shoulders shaking. I mean, she cried for, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. She cried a long, and I'm thinking, well, all I did was tell her the truth. But that was truth she didn't need to hear. She just didn't need to hear it. So the next day, I mean, I was freaked out by this. And the next day, I got an appointment with some Alzheimer's expert. And I walked in the office and I said, I don't think I can do this. And she said, honey, from what I hear, you don't have much choice. She was right. And I said, but what do I do? And then she gave me the best advice I ever got about caregiving. She said, quit trying to drag your mother into your world. She can't go there anymore. Instead, you have got to go in her world. Go into her world. And I got it. I mean, I got it the second she said it. It was like a click. And I continued going in her world for the next 14 years of caregiving.
Wow. Yeah.
And over those 14 years, you can imagine how much things changed.
Oh, yeah. Lots.
Yes. Because I know you had broken, didn't you have, weren't there broken hips and broken bones and things like that? And yeah.
Yes. I got to tell you, the first 4 or 5 years in independent living, I got this false sense of security that things are going pretty well. Of course, I got to be friends with everybody. They, I would have Sunday dinner with them, and the food was good, and we had fun. And then Christmas Eve of 2000, my mother fell in her room in the middle of the night, going to the bathroom, I'm sure, and broke her hip. And that changed everything. Had to have an operation the next morning on Christmas Eve. She was out of her mind for 2 or 3 days from the anesthetic. And then, of course, she had to go to rehab, but she couldn't make it in rehab because of the dementia.
Right.
And then I had to they threw her out. I mean, not threw her, I shouldn't say. They just said she couldn't stay.
Right.
Sure.
Because she couldn't make measurable progress, which is what you must do for Medicare to pay for it.
Oh, okay.
So they gave me 1 day to find a nursing home for her. And I wanted it to be the Wesleyan because they'd been to good independent living, and they had 1 bed open. And it was in a room with 3 other people on the first floor looking at the ugly back parking lot. And they'd been on the 4th floor before looking at trees. You think my mama cared? She never. She was within that room with 3 roommates for the next 8 years.
Oh,
wow.
Almost 9 years.
Wow.
And she never mentioned a roommate. As far as they were concerned, as she was concerned, they didn't even exist. It was her room.
Interesting. Her world again.
Exactly.
Her
world. And her.
She didn't care what the outside view was. I mean, I cared at first because I thought it was a big deal, but of course it wasn't a big deal. And ultimately I learned, I like this room because it's just one door from the nursing station.
Right.
That's where you want to be, near the nursing station.
Okay. Good
Right.
tip.
Good tip. I was thinking about flowers and trees and view, not important at all. So when I got smart enough to realize that, I kept her there, even when we could have moved her to a smaller room because I wanted her in that location.
Being her.
So there's just so many things you don't know going in.
Right.
And I was the king of not knowing. And I think what?
You do now.
I know now. And I think that one of the things that people get from the book is I share all my screw ups, and there were many. So by me sharing them and then overcoming them and accepting that I don't know everything, I'm gonna have to try faking it a lot, that gives them permission to do it. And also they see that if this guy could do it for 14 years, surely they could do it.
Yeah.
Because I put it all out there, and I put all the, because a lot of times you are faking. I mean, many times you don't really know the right thing to do, and you go with what your gut says or what you hope is right. Sometimes it is right, sometimes it's not. And then you adjust. And I did a lot of adjusting over time. And funny things happening. I'm just going to tell you one. Sunday dinner at Independent Living was great. Best meal of the week. So I always showed up for Sunday dinner. And I can remember sitting there at the table, table of 6. I'm sitting right at the end. My father is right here. And I am just taking a forkful of great roast beef. It was on the way to my mouth. And Dad said loudly, "Jim, I want you to give me an enema after lunch." I mean, I almost passed out. This was not in my game plan.
Right. Yes. Just the thought of actually having to ever do that and discussing it in front of everybody at the dinner table.
Yeah. I mean, to him, it didn't matter at all, but it was just like, and let's just say my services were not appreciated, didn't do the best job, was never asked to do that again.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
No filter.
But it's a funny moment. And if you can't see the humor in it, you've got to be able to laugh at yourself and laugh at the situation so that you don't go crazy.
Right. Because some of the situations you couldn't make up even if you tried. The reality is much more crazy, is much crazier sometimes than what you would even imagine. Yeah.
One night in skilled nursing, my mother got up and it was cold. And by this time she'd fallen, broken her hip, and she had a walker, and she never went any place without the walker or a wheelchair or something. But cold night, like we're having right now, and she gets up in the middle of the night and somehow loosens the thing around her. She's not supposed to be able to get out of bed, but she found a way out, and she got in the bed with somebody else in the room.
Oh no.
And I guess the alarm finally went off, and the nurses came in, and they're looking all over they didn't see her where she was in the room. They start going down the halls, all over the place. They're looking all over. Finally, they come back to the room. There she is. And they wake her up. She says, "Leave me alone. I'm sleeping with my husband."
Oh.
Well,
wow.
It was another person, just wasn't her.
It was another person, and she thought it was Daddy.
Right.
Of course, by that time, he'd broken his hip 7 months after she did. He was in B wing. She was in A wing. So it was, we went from the wonders of independent living to both of them in skilled nursing in 7 months.
I know this is a loaded question because this is, it's not this simple, but what's maybe one piece of advice or encouragement that you could give to people who are in the midst of this, of the things that you went through, but they're right in the thick of it?
I think the most important thing that I would tell them is that you are doing a wonderful thing to show up for your parents. You may not be doing it perfectly. You may not want to do it. You may have all sorts of issues with doing it. It may really be hard. But the truth is that as time goes by, you're going to feel good about the fact that you did the right thing. You're going to look back on it and say, yes, it was hard, but I did my part. And lots of adult children don't do their parts. So you're one of the ones, who, my mom would say, you're going to get stars in your heavenly crown, is what my mom would have said.
Oh.
And it was one of her many expressions, but you're really doing the right thing to show up. And I think if you realize that and give yourself some credit for that, it's really, really important.
Yeah.
You can tell not only from his stories that Jim's not only a great author, but he's one of the best professional speakers in the country. Right. And I know you share these stories around the country, helping people, and that has to be so fulfilling for you.
I've loved it. I've spoken all over the place, and I still do. And it makes me so happy when people come up to me afterwards and we get to have these personal conversations. And I learned they share what's going on in their lives, and I'm able to sometimes really help them, not only from the speech, but from our interactions afterward, because it is tough. Even when you got everything going for you, it is still tough. But it is rewarding. It's the best. I tried my life, that you both know about me. I spent my years trying to be an actor in New York and a comedy writer and speech writer for CEOs. And I wanted to be rich and famous. Well, didn't exactly happen. But this was the most important thing I ever did. Caring for my parents, writing this book, making these speeches, encouraging other people. That was what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And if you'd have told me that before it all happened, I'd have said, no way. It was the most important thing I ever did. And it may be the most important thing that people are watching this podcast right now ever do. And also, I would urge you, if you're watching this and you're, say, 60 yourself or 65 or in that area, make sure you have conversations with your own adult children about what you want and what you don't want as you age, and make sure that you've got a will and powers of attorney. So it's going to be so much easier when it comes time for you to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely have learned so much, and everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has experiences to share, and that preparation is so important to hopefully make things move and go a little smoother. Yeah.
And you talk about
there's an interesting statistic. You may have heard this. 7 out of 10 Americans do not have a will.
Wow.
10 out of 10 are going to die. I guarantee you.
Yes.
Right. And it makes it so complicated if you don't.
Yeah.
And even people who are smart, even people who know better, there's something about doing a will that scares people. Like, if I write it down, that means I'm really going to die. Well, you're going to die anyway.
Right. Well, or we always think we have more time. Like, I can get that done.
For a while.
Yeah. Because it's not a fun thing to talk about or think about, but also we always think, we got plenty of time. And we don't always. So,
No.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, you talk about being rich and famous. You're famous in our world. Thank you so much for all that you do for caregivers all over the country.
This was fun. I really enjoyed talking to you.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah, everybody's got a story.
Isn't it great to talk to?
Yeah.
It's so inspirational hearing somebody like that. Just give us ideas about how to live our lives, knowing that we have so much to do, but it's so fulfilling.
And looking for the humor.
Exactly.
He always does a great job at that. But looking for that humor keeps us from crying a lot. So
try to keep that smile on your face. Hey, if you have other topics you'd like us to talk about, please let us know at Parenting Aging Parents.